Proverbs chapter 1. I'm going to just consider together again this evening that same passage we looked at last week, Proverbs chapter 1 verses 1 through to 7. Last week we did a very broad introduction of that passage, if you like. Almost like looking at a travel brochure. We considered who the teacher was. We considered what his methods were, that he would teach us through words and through riddles and through parables and proverbs and all those kinds of things. We considered who the beneficiaries were, who these proverbs were intended for the simple and for the wise and so on. And we then considered briefly the purposes for the proverbs. And so it was like a very broad overview of a travel brochure. This week, I want us to come to the same passage, and I want us to focus, bring it into more focus this evening, and particularly to focus on the purpose of the Proverbs. So Proverbs chapter 1, and reading from verse 1. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for attaining wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of insight, for acquiring a disciplined and prudent life, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, let the discerning get guidance, for understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. As we come to that passage, we saw, and last week we looked at it, we saw that the purpose for the Proverbs was to teach wisdom and discipline, as he says in verse 2 there, for attaining wisdom and discipline. It was to form character, as we said last week, and it was to encourage an obedient relationship with God. Three sort of broad terms that we looked at. What are the purposes of the Proverbs? But I want to flesh that out a bit more this evening. And I want to say that really the purpose of the Proverbs can really be summed up in what he says there right at the beginning of verse 2, for attaining wisdom. For attaining wisdom. All the rest, if you like, is commentary about what wisdom is. It's commentary, and it's really just showing different facets of what wisdom is. And so this evening, what I want us to do is I want us to open that up a little bit. What is wisdom? How is it obtained? And what does it produce? Why should we be so anxious to be wise? Some people have said, my mind is made up. Don't confuse me with the facts. In other words, I'm quite happy to continue in my own simplicity. I'm quite happy to just remain a fool. We know of somebody who says, I don't ever read the newspapers. I don't listen to the news because I don't want to know what's going on out there. I'm quite happy just remaining ignorant about things. So why is it? What are the benefits of wisdom? Why should we seek it? What is it in the first place? And how is it to be obtained? So we'll start there. Well, what is wisdom? What is a wise man? If you were to ask that question to people, some people would answer it by saying, oh, well, if you want to look for a wise man, go to the universities and go and look up the professors, go and look up the PhDs, those people who are doing research doctorates and all those kinds of things. Those are the wise people. Go and look for them. And certainly they may be wise in certain areas, and they may have plenty of knowledge and so on. But is that really what a wise person is? Others would say, no, wisdom is far deeper than that. You've got to be able to come to somebody who is able to understand things and think through things. And some people would look to the gurus and say, oh yes, this philosopher, there's a wise man, a man who is thinking deeply, He loves wisdom. That's what the word philosophy means. It's somebody who loves wisdom, and he thinks deeply and spends his time trying to ask all manner of questions and answer those questions, and thereby come to some wise ways of living. And certainly I would say that if you want to be wise, you need to be asking questions, and you need to be answering those questions as honestly as possible. Some people, they say, oh, well, when you've got a bit of grey hair on your head, well, then you're wise. You've got a bit of experience under the belt, and that's made you wise. No, that's not necessarily made you wise. Sometimes all we've done is repeated 1 year's experience over and over and over again. Certainly, if we have lots of experiences and we're learning from those experiences and we are growing, then by all means, a certain amount of wisdom does come by age. But that's not what the Bible is talking about when it speaks about wisdom. The very word that Solomon uses here when he says it's for attaining wisdom is the same word that is used in Exodus chapter 28 and Exodus 31 and all of those passages through there where it's describing a person who is a skillful person. You remember that God says to Moses, you must go and I want you to construct this tabernacle. And what I want you to do in constructing this tabernacle, I want you to call the skilled artisans. I want you to call those people who have skills to be able to construct this tabernacle. I want you to call together those seamsters and tailors who are able to sew the priestly garments. And the word that is used to describe these people are wise people. They are skillful. Those women who were able to take the goat's hair and spin it into yarn and to make beautiful yarn of blue and purple and scarlet, that was skillful, that was wise. They are described as wise. It was used to describe the artisans who artistically beautified the tabernacle. When we were going around Jordan to have a look at the wonderful craftsmanship that is involved in some of those ancient ruins, particularly when you go to Petra, it just takes your breath away of how they must have, with what difficulty they must have constructed those buildings. But they didn't just construct these massive buildings out of rock, they constructed beautiful buildings. The intricacy of the designs and the patterns that are there are absolutely breathtaking. So turn with me to Exodus and let's just look at how those words are used. Exodus 28, for instance, a couple of examples. We'll just use two. Exodus 28 and verse 3. Tell all the skilled men to whom I have given wisdom in such matters that they are to make garments for Aaron for his consecration, so he may serve me as a priest. You see, they are skilled men whom I have given wisdom to. God says my wisdom is in their skill. Chapter 31 and verse 3. And I have filled him, let's read from verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, see, I have chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with skill, ability, and knowledge in all kinds of crafts. Some versions will say that I've given him skill, ability, and wisdom in all kinds of crafts. And so it speaks of ability, it speaks of skill, it speaks of a craftsmanship. In other words, yes, it is head knowledge. There's a certain amount of head knowledge. Any artisan, any person who is skilled at some particular trade has head knowledge of what should happen and how you're to do certain things. They have knowledge of the materials that they work with and they're skilled in that. But it's much more than that. It's an ability to be able to use that head knowledge, to be able to understand the medium that you're working with, to be able to understand the subject, to be able to understand what is the end that you are trying to achieve, and therefore to best work in a way that will achieve those ends with that particular material and those particular tools. That's a wise man, a man who knows what tool to use for what job, when, where, and for what purpose, end result. You probably have heard the story about the chap who went to the cathedral in Cape Town when it was being constructed, and walked past the site, and there were the stonemasons sitting, chipping away at the blocks, at the rocks, to form the stone so that they were going to construct the cathedral out of. And he went to the first one, he said to him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm just chopping rocks." And he went to another one, he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm making blocks that are going to be used for constructing the cathedral." And he went to the third one and he said to him, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm serving the Lord by creating for him a wonderful place where his people can come and worship him." Now that's wisdom, you see. He could see the ultimate, and he could see the greatest purpose behind everything that was being done. So wisdom is far more than just some kind of esoteric, no, that's the wrong word, some kind of erudite, intellectual, academic knowledge. It's a skill that one has to use with which to create and do something wonderful. I remember as a young child, a young boy, a man coming to see my father, very distraught. He was having problems in his marriage, and he came to see my dad because he felt he could get some counsel from my father. And the problem in his marriage was this: his wife was a highly educated woman. She was a teacher, and she had a number of degrees behind her name, and she used to treat him with great disparagement. She would just say to him, "You are just, all you are is a panel beater. That's all you are. You're just a panel beater. Look at me, I've got degrees in that. All you've got is a trade." And I can remember my dad saying to him, "Well, then say to her, come outside and repair this car for me," because he used to do a lot of panel beating in his backyard to earn extra money. And he said, "Tell her to come outside and panel beat the car. Tell her to come and fix that car, and see how educated she really is." You see, yes, she might have an education there, but she doesn't have an education here. She's earning a certain salary as a teacher there, but you're actually earning far more than her as a panel beater. You see? We need to realize that here is a skill that can be used, and any skill that we have, if it is used to the glory of God, is wisdom. It can be a skill that can be used not just in creating beautiful artistic things, in building things and functioning things. I'm not talking just about that. It can be a skill like Moses had. Moses was a wise man. Joshua was a very wise man. And their skill, their ability, their wisdom was in their ability to lead people. Deuteronomy 34 and verse 9 says that Joshua the son of Nun was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hand on him. So the Israelites listened to him and did what the Lord had commanded Moses. They listened to Joshua. They followed Joshua. God gave Joshua wisdom in giving him the skill to be able to lead the people, which is exactly what Solomon asked for, if you remember, in 1 Kings chapter 4 and verse 24. When God says to Solomon, "You ask for whatever you want and I'll give it to you," and Solomon turns around to God and he says, I've got it wrong here, 1 Kings 4. Yeah, I've got the wrong verse here. But Solomon asks for wisdom. Why? Because he says, "How can I lead these people?"
1 Kings 3, 7.
1 Kings 3 verse 7. I've got the wrong, that's not quite it. But he asked something about, how can I lead these people? How can I, it's going to be such a difficult job. So the only way that I can do that is if you give me the wisdom to do it. So what is this wisdom? Yes, it's a skill, and it's a skill to do things to the glory of God, but it comprises a number of things. It comprises knowledge. It's made up of knowledge. if you turn to 2 Chronicles chapter 1 and verses 10 to 12. Give me wisdom and knowledge that I may... Actually, that's the verse I was looking for. It's contained here as well. Give me wisdom and knowledge that I may lead this people. For who is able to govern this people of yours? God said to Solomon, since this is your heart's desire, and you've not asked for wealth, riches, or honor, nor for the death of your enemies, and since you have not asked for a long life, but for wisdom and knowledge to govern my people over whom I have made you king, therefore wisdom and knowledge will be given you, and I will also give you wealth, riches, and honor, such as no king who was before you have ever had, and none after you will have. Notice what God says to him there. I will give you wisdom and knowledge. Knowledge is a component of wisdom. And by knowledge here, he's not just meaning, if you look at the word and how that word is translated and how it is used in various places, you'll see that it's not just a knowledge of facts. It's not just a matter that Solomon could recite his 24 times tables. It wasn't those kinds of facts. He probably was able to do all kinds of mathematical things like that. But it referred to much more. It refers to intelligence, to having an intellect. There's a difference. Many people can be great academics, but they're not necessarily intelligent. They don't really have intelligence. They can learn. I often used to say that exams were really just a test of your writing speed and your short-term memory skill. That's what it was about. And some people could master the technique of passing exams. I'd learned the technique of passing Hebrew exams when I was at college. We had a lecturer who, whenever she was going to put something in the exam and she was teaching us that thing, she used to say, now listen with both ears. She used to put her hands up like this, and you just used to write that down. And so what I used to do was I used to go into the exam and I had a list of all those things that I knew, and I'd learnt all those things off by heart, and I'd learnt all my parsings and all of the various parts of speech and all those things, and I'd learnt to write them down into a table. So I would go into the exam, and the first thing I'd do before I even opened the paper was I'd quickly draw up this table, and I'd write all those things down, and I'd get them all there, and then from there I would answer the Hebrew paper. And I got distinctions in Hebrew. But I want to tell you, I'm not intelligent in Hebrew at all. It means thoughtfulness. Ecclesiastes chapter 10 and verse 20. That's what this knowledge refers to, the intellectual knowledge. Chapter 10 and verse 20. Do not revile the king even in your thoughts, in your knowledge. Don't revile the king, your intellect, or curse the rich in your bedroom, because a bird of the air may carry your words, and so on. It speaks of thoughtfulness, the ability to think. There's some people who can learn things by rote, but by the end of the day, they haven't been able to think for themselves. And that's intelligence, that's knowledge. To be able to reason, through things and work things out. Turn with me to Daniel chapter 1 and verse 4. Here's a very interesting use of this word of knowledge. Remember that the people have been taken into exile, and Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, has besieged Jerusalem. And what does he do? We'll read from verse 3. The king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. Now, does anybody have a different translation there? It speaks here about learning in the NIV. They are people who show aptitude for every kind of learning. Does anybody have a different translation?
It says, youth in whom was not defect, who were good looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom.
In every branch of wisdom?
Yes.
Okay, that's not.
Young men and women there was no blemish, good looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and who may not teach the language of the living God.
The King James actually refers to them having a ability in science. It says that they are well informed and showing aptitude for every kind of science.
ESV says skillful in wisdom.
Skillful in wisdom. That's a different translation of it, but you see, it's a studying. The sciences are studying. The NIV brings it out as learning. Theology is the science of the study of God. Biology is the study of the science of living things and plants and so on. And so knowledge, yes, it's a matter of learning things, but it's not just having that knowledge, it's showing an aptitude, as the NIV says it here, for these things, to be able to reason through them. So it's not just academic acquisition of facts. All that gives you is what I've before called educated idiots. Neither is it just a matter of being great intellectuals, because you can be an academic without being an intellectual. You can be an academic and be an intellectual. You can't really be an intellectual without being academic, but you can have academics and intellectual, but even being a good academic and having a great intellect doesn't mean to say that you will be wise. Being wise means taking all of that and keeping that awareness, keeping cognizance of all of those things. Somebody described it like this. They said, it is the opposite to being ignorant. If we take the word ignorant to mean that I am ignoring the things that I know, that's an ignorant person. I don't know these things and I don't want to know them. Those things that I do know, I couldn't care about them. I'm ignorant of those things. That's a foolish person. A wise person says, these things I know, these things I'm keeping in my mind, and these things I will live towards, and I will do everything I can around these things. That's why the proverb says that the fools despise wisdom and discipline. Job says the same thing in Job chapter 28. People who realize, as they look at the world and they see the way the whole thing is constructed and they see the way everything puts together, they've got all that knowledge, they've got all that academics, they have all that intelligence, but they also put it together with thoughtfulness, they put it together with reasoning. They say, because of these things, I need to worship the Creator who has created all these things. The fool looks at all those things and says, no, I don't need to. So ultimately, that's what wisdom is all about. But it also comprises discernment, you see. He tells us here that it comprises discernment. It comprises understanding and insight. The word discernment really means the ability to distinguish, to be able to separate things out and to say, okay, this is the issue. A wise counselor, a discerning counselor, is somebody who can help the counselee to come in with all of their baggage, with all of the mess that's going on in their lives, and say to them, okay, now let's just sit down for a moment and let's analyze this whole thing. Okay, so to use one analogy, let's take this drawer, there's all these things are all messed up in those drawers. Let's take the socks and put the socks one side. Let's take the shirts and we'll put them another side. And let's take the handkerchiefs and we'll do that. And we'll sort these things out into their different piles. And okay, there we see, here's some jewelry. Well, that doesn't belong in this drawer. That belongs in that drawer over there. This stuff here is dirty. That needs to get washed and we'll sort that out. And then it can be ironed and it can be put back. And so that's what a wise counselor will do, so that the counselee can go away and wash those hankies and iron them and come and put them back. And so by the time they've gone through the session of counseling, they have a drawer that is now nice and neat, and they can keep things running in their lives smoothly. So it's the ability to be able to separate and distinguish and analyze things. It's the ability to test things and then to hold fast to that which is good. To test things and say, no, that's bad, and this is good. That's what discernment is about. And wisdom, discernment is a absolutely intricate part of wisdom. It also comprises discipline. How to control the use of the knowledge. You see, some people have all sorts of knowledge, and sometimes they just go around blurting that knowledge out in places where it shouldn't be blurted out, and using it in ways that it shouldn't be used. That's not intelligent at all. You think of the world has many, many examples of how man has used his knowledge to terrible, evil, and destructive purposes rather than for good. And so it's the ability to control and restrain oneself. Job chapter 12 and verse 18, in fact, translates the word discipline in exactly that way. Job 12 verse 18 says, he takes off the shackles put on by the king. That word shackles is the discipline. He takes off the discipline put on by the kings. Or some translations might have the bonds put on by the king. And so, yes, it speaks about a person who's able to control themselves and restrain themselves. Some people have all sorts of wonderful knowledges and abilities, but they really don't know how to use them wisely in society. But the greatest component, the most important component of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. We see that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. It is a foundational component of wisdom. Psalm 111 and verse 10. Here we read in Proverbs, it says it is the beginning of knowledge, but if you go to Psalm 111 and verse 10, it says that wisdom, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, as does Job 28 and verse 28. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So the fear of the Lord, yes, it's a foundational component of wisdom, but we are told here that it's also a foundational component of knowledge, the fear of the Lord. What is Solomon telling us in that? Are these contradictory statements? No, they're complementary statements. What Solomon is getting at here when he says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, what he's saying is this, is that we are a people, the wise people are people who will look at everything round about them, look at everything that's going on, and they will see God in it all. They will see God's purposes behind it all. They will see God's actions behind it all. So Richard Dawkins, with all his learning, with all his academics, with all his intellect, and let's face it, he's a very intellectual man, and he's a great academic, but with all of that, he ends up as a fool because he will not fear the Lord. And the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. He doesn't know how anything works because he's left the very foundational building block out. That God is the creator of everything that he's studying. So he's now turned around and said, no, it's something else. And that's wisdom. But how is it obtained? Well, as we go through this, we'll see that it's obtained by discipline. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for attaining wisdom and discipline. We gain wisdom through the Proverbs, by disciplining ourselves to the study of the Proverbs, by following the discipleship that is put up for us by the Proverbs. So yes, discipline is a component of wisdom, but discipline is also a building block towards attaining wisdom. Likewise, discernment is also a means of obtaining wisdom. If we are able to discern between various things, we will grow in wisdom. If you are able to test things and say, yes, this is good and that is bad, I'm going to follow this route. Now, as you're going down that good route, you've grown in wisdom, you've increased in wisdom, But as you go down that road, you will again come to some choices. Which is good and which is bad? And again, you choose the good. So the wisdom grows. So discernment, yes, it's a component of wisdom, but it's also one of the means by which wisdom is obtained. Thirdly, the fear of the Lord. Likewise, it is the main component in wisdom, but the Bible tells us the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It is the foundation and it produces wisdom. So again, the more that if you're coming off of this foundation that God has created all things and you see the whole world in a godly structure, you have a biblical world view. Yes, that is a wonderful component of wisdom, but it is also a wonderful means for growing in more wisdom, because you will be able to build on solid building foundations, solid building blocks. You'll be able to build more. And it's obtained by using that wisdom and that fear of the Lord. It's obtained by using that discernment. It's obtained by using that discipline and applying them to the words of God, to the proverbs, to the parables, to the riddles that he has given to us. Let the wise listen and add to their learning. Let the discerning get guidance for understanding proverbs and parables and sayings and riddles and the riddles of the wise. Notice that let the wise add to their learning. Let the discerning get guidance. Do you see, those who are discerning are to get guidance. What does guidance help you do? It helps you to be more discerning. And so these things are self-propagating. It is applied, and we receive wisdom as we apply that discipline and that discernment and that fear of the Lord in humility to growing. Verse 5 says, let the wise listen and add to their learning. Oh, you may think that you are wise. You may think that you know it all. But that's not wise at all. We need to have a teachable spirit. Friends, I want to say to you, that's the most foolish thing you can ever wish to see. The saddest thing you can ever wish to see is a person who doesn't have a teachable spirit. I know it all. I know it all. No, you can't teach me. No, I know it all. Such a person is anything but wise. But ultimately, friends, the point is about how wisdom is obtained from God. Now look at chapter 2, Proverbs chapter 2 and verse 6. For the Lord gives wisdom, and from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. Exodus 28 verse 3, Exodus 31 verse 3, which we read, verse 6. What does God say? He says, go and find those men whom I have given wisdom to, who are skilled in all kinds of crafts, because I have given them that wisdom. How did Solomon get his wisdom? He asked God to give him that wisdom, and God gave him that wisdom. You see, here is the great foundational epistemological statement. Where does all wisdom come from? It comes from God. Ultimately, how do we learn anything? How do we find anything out? Ultimately, it's because God is the source of that knowledge. God leads us in that way. As we read together from Job chapter 28 earlier, you cannot get wisdom by searching for it. Go and try and find wisdom. Where are you going to go? You're going to go into the deep? You're going to go into the sea? You're not going to find it. You can't go to the deepest of mines. It's not to be found there. You can't purchase it. You can't go and buy it with gold or silver or with rubies, as Job says. As Solomon says in Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verses 13 through to 17, that you can't find it out. He says, I devoted myself to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heaven. What a heavy burden God has laid on men. With all my study, really, what do I come out to in terms of adding to wisdom? Really nothing. That's what he's saying. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after wind. Here was Solomon, who was probably the greatest student he was the greatest student of his time, studied in all the sciences. And yet, having studied all of those things, he says that doesn't lead me to wisdom. I've gained all this knowledge about these things, but I haven't got any wisdom. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I thought to myself, look, I have grown and increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learnt that this too is a chasing after wind. As I try to understand wisdom and as I try to understand foolishness, I can't understand it just by studying it. You can't go and buy a textbook and find it out in those things. You can't get it at a university. You can get knowledge there, but you cannot get wisdom. You can get an education, and an education is essential in growing in wisdom, but you cannot get wisdom simply by an education. It doesn't produce wisdom. And let me say, when I say education, I'm not necessarily speaking about having a degree. There are some people who have educations that you cannot buy for love or money in a university, but they've gained in that education through life's experiences. I can remember sitting at a meeting at Skuchheim, a Natal Baptist Association meeting, and there was an old man. He had arrived. He served the Lord somewhere up in the not Richards Bay. What's the one from there? Near Richards Bay, where Leon was. Anyway, he was in that area, and he arrived. He had this old car. It had these two massive big speakers on the top of this car, and he used to ride through the township preaching with these speakers blaring out all over the place, and he used to set up tent meetings, and he used to worship, he used to serve the Lord in those ways. And I can remember him sitting there. He was an old man. He was buckled and bent, and he had his stick, and he sat on his chair, and he just listened to all the things that were going on and never said a word. He had grey hair. I didn't have grey hair in those days, and he sat there, and this little bit grey hair, and he sat there with his stick, and he didn't say a word. And then at just the right time, he just spoke up. And here was a man, he probably didn't have more than a standard 6 in terms of formal education. But what came out of his mouth were pure gems. And everybody just said, that's it, you've hit the nail on the head. We've been working around all the way over there, but you, as you have studied in life school, you have gained that education. You see, it's a sort of difference that's between a student who might be studying music and might have a Bachelor of Music degree. They've got all that knowledge, but they can't come near a child protege like Mozart, who at 7 can compose these beautiful symphonies. Oh yes, Mozart's wisdom in music could grow by studying, but God has to give that component. It's given by God. And it's given, friends, to whom is it given? Well, it's given to the righteous. Psalm 37 and verse 30. The mouth of the righteous man utters wisdom, and his tongue speaks what is right. It's given to those who are honest. Psalm 51 and verse 6. Surely you desire truth in the inner parts. You teach me wisdom in the inmost place. And ultimately it's given to those who are disciplined, who submit to the Lord's teaching, to observe it and to put it into practice. Deuteronomy chapter 4. Let's just turn there. Deuteronomy 4 verses 5 and 6. See, I have taught you decrees and laws as the Lord my God commanded me, so that you may follow them in the land you are entering to take possession of it. Observe them carefully, for this will show your wisdom and understanding to the nations who will hear about all the decrees and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. They are observing that which God has commanded them. They are carefully following these things. And so yes, those who discipline themselves to obeying the Lord, that is who wisdom is given to. But above all, it's given to those who fear him. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And we don't like that word fear. But let me say to you, yes, we are to speak of that word fear. It means respect. It means reverence. There are many people that I respect as a equal. I'm on an equal standing with them, and I respect them, and I respect them as an equal. But there are also those that I respect who are my superiors. When you work for a boss, you respect them because they are your superior. They are the ones who have the power of hiring and firing. And so you need to respect them. You need to treat them with that respect. And so there's a certain amount of fear in that kind of respect. So yes, we are to fear God because he is the one who has the power of life and death over us. He is the sovereign God. We are to reverence him. We are to respect him. But not respect him as an equal. To respect him as the sovereign God. As the one who is our superior. Well, then very briefly, what does it produce? What does this wisdom produce? And we don't have time to really open this up too much, but I'm just going to say very quickly, it produces discernment. We've already said that. It produces discernment. Yes, it comprises discernment, and it is obtained through discernment, but it also produces discernment. Likewise, discipline. It is comprised of discipline. It's obtained by discipline, but it also produces discipline. Likewise, the fear of the Lord. It comprises the fear of the Lord. Wisdom is made up of the fear of the Lord. It's obtained by the fear of the Lord, but it also produces the fear of the Lord. And as I say, I wish we had time to flesh this out a bit more. But what is that doing? All of those things, this discipline, this discernment, and this fear of the Lord, all of them produce a good character. Because they produce a character which is wise in its dealings and prudent in its life, as Solomon says, doing what is right, doing what is just, and doing what is fair. You see, if we have that discernment and that discipline and that fear of the Lord, they will continue to grow and they will continue to be multiplied in our lives. And what that will produce is a good character, a wise character, wise in its dealings, prudent in its life, doing what is right, doing what is just, doing what is fair. And friends, if we live a life like that, that will be a life that is abundant. That will be a life that is joyful. That will be a life that is fruitful. That will be a life that is godly. Because such a life will truly be a life that will worship God. So yes, ultimately wisdom is obtained from God through the fear of the Lord. And it produces the fear of the Lord, which is the beginning of knowledge and the beginning of wisdom. So if you can picture it like this, and let me just end with this. It's like our garden. In our garden we have a white stinkwood tree, that one just outside our patio. Now that white stinkwood tree, at a certain time of the year, it drops little seeds. And those little seeds fall all over our garden because it's a big tree. And those little seeds germinate and they produce other little stinkwood trees. And if we don't pull those little stinkwood trees out, those little stinkwood trees produce little seeds which will produce other stinkwood trees. We've been in that house for 10 years. If we hadn't been pulling out little stinkwood saplings every year that we've been in that house, we would have a forest of stinkwood trees there right now. And that's what the wisdom of the Lord, the fear of the Lord is like. That is what the discernment and the discipline is like. That one produces the other, and it grows like a forest. Amen.